Hi, I'm Michael Hirsh. I've had a great career in animation, making shows like the first Star Wars cartoons, the Beetlejuice cartoon, Max and Ruby, and many, many, many more. And you're listening to me now on GeekCast Radio.
You are listening to another GeekCast Radio Presents Interview. I am one of your hosts, TFG1Mike. With me, as always, is Steve Megatron. Hello, sir.
Hello.
Tonight, whenever you find people listening to this, we're going to be talking with award-winning television producer, entrepreneur, and author Michael Hirsh. From A Cosmic Christmas to The Devil and Daniel Mouse, The Care Bears, Star Wars, Droids and Ewoks, to Babar the Movie and more, The Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew, which I have a story about later, and Johnny Test, along with Beetlejuice. Uh-oh, I think I just summoned the demon. Plus so much more, Michael has led an interesting life and had an amazing career. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm doing great. Really happy to be here talking to you and your audience tonight.
Absolutely. All right. So we have a lot of questions. We have both read your book, Animation Nation. It is an excellent book. We don't want to spoil it for anybody, but some of the questions might be spoilers.
Let's see.
All right, Steve, kick it off.
So one of the things that when I first was reading through was the, of course, Lucasfilm moment. Can you describe a pivotal moment receiving the call from Lucasfilm, and how did you maintain composure and, project the confidence, even though Nelvana was a small company at the time?
So the call came out of the blue. Lucasfilm was working on the 2-hour holiday special, and George Lucas had maintained control of the 10-minute cartoon that he wanted in the special. And he was looking for an animation company, and George wasn't particularly a fan of doing things in LA. He was Marin County, San Francisco based himself, and wanted to work with people generally outside of LA. But I didn't know that at the time. What I did know was that the call came from out of the blue. We were busy making our second animated special, The Devil and Daniel Mouse, and the person on the other line asked me if we were the company that had produced A Cosmic Christmas. And A Cosmic Christmas was a holiday special that was our first fully animated show. It was a half television, half-hour show. And Lucas had seen it, even though it was a syndicated show, not a network show. And so not easy to find, not that well promoted. And he wanted to meet and talk about whether we could do this cartoon for him, the 10-minute cartoon, which became The Faithful Wookiee. And so I flew down to LA. No, I flew down to San Francisco and rented a car, drove to Marin County, followed the instructions I'd been given. I landed in a shopping center in San Rafael, and I was told that there would be a telephone booth in the corner, because this is the era before mobile phones, even before the brick phones. And so I'd go to the phone booth, and I called the number I was given. Somebody in a nondescript building in the middle of the parking lot waved to me and said, "Come on over." So I walked over to the building, which had no number on it and no branding. And I was told to shut my eyes because I was going to walk through a shot they were shooting of the Millennium Falcon for the Empire Strikes Back, which was still in production.
That's so awesome.
Yep.
So what were some of the most significant lessons you learned from George Lucas and his team during your collaboration on the Star Wars holiday special?
So to start off with, George Lucas, obviously because of the great movies he made, had developed a team of people around him who were really the best in the business. So Ben Bird, who did his sound design, fantastic. He invented the Ewok language, the Wookiee language, all the alien bar languages, as well as making great sound effects and for those movies that he worked on. and he's done a lot of the best movies in Hollywood. So he was somebody we got to work with, and we got to work with people at every level at Lucasfilm. And in each case, you're dealing with somebody who's really top of their game. And our team was very young. We were still a young studio. We were just doing our second animated project. And our people got a chance to learn from, the people at Lucasfilm. And George was terrific at sharing his point of view. He was helpful in advising us when we were looking to do our first animated feature. And it really provided some excellent mentoring, which, has really motivated me over the years to mentor others.
Very cool.
Your early love of comics and stories is evident. How did these early influences shape your approach to storytelling and the animation later on?
Well, comic books, as you were saying, is something I gravitated to very young. And it was an era where comic books were still reasonably new. When we think that the first superhero comics, are 1937, 1938, this is like 1954, 55. And, comics are everywhere. They're at a very successful stage, but it's mainly DC and, you've got the beginning of the Marvel comics before they became Marvel, trying to build up an audience, but not yet breaking through. So dynamic period. And at the same time, you still had, in that period, you had EC Comics. And, during my career, I was able to produce the animated version of Tales from the Crypt, but it was called Tales from the Crypt Keeper. In any case, so these comics really kept me inspired. And so at Nelvana, we did quite a few comic book-based properties. So we did Tintin based upon Hergé's classic comic series. I'm sorry.
Oh, I just was going, mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. And I'll go double your mm-mm. Mm. You can't stop me. Once I get started, you can't stop. So, so we did Tintin, which was a great, French comic book property. When we did the Star Wars cartoon, the first one, The Faithful Wookiee, we did it in the style of the French artist Mobius, who did artwork for what was the French version of Heavy Metal. And it had a terrific visual influence over, many people of my generation. And that was a look that hadn't really been seen much or at all in animation. So that was kind of interesting. And then later we did some Wildcat and Savage Dragon comics working with Jim Lee at Image. And, those are, and then we did Sam and Max, which was a great cartoon we did for Fox based on a comic book. And we did a comic strip called Committed. All in all, it was a period that the comic books and the comic strips really kind of were one of the drivers that made me want to be, build a career in the animation industry.
Absolutely. That's awesome. How did your immigrant experience shape your identity and your perspective on the animation industry, both in Canada and globally?
So I grew up as an immigrant, moving from Belgium to Toronto, and eventually from Toronto to the Bronx. I consider the Bronx a country unto itself. And then back to Canada. And so I've moved around, and I have a lot of empathy for people who are immigrants. It's a large class in our society, and, it's a group that works hard. And my relationship to it, I think, was largely being very open to things from other cultures. So I read a lot of European literature as a kid, and which is partly how we did Babar at Nelvana. And whenever I've come across an interesting non-English language or non-US or non-Canada title or an author, I've been very open to doing that. So at Nelvana, we adapted Pippi Longstocking, which is the leading, children's property from Sweden. We did Never Ending Story, which, was a top kids property in Germany. We obviously did Babar and Tintin, working with our old partners at Canal Plus. We did Rupert Bear, working with the Daily Express, who owned it. and with Anne and Ian Miles, who were British producers and distributors. So over the years, we did a lot of these properties that had a global appeal, but had sort of international connectivity. And I think my growing up as an immigrant just kept me open to that, whereas a lot of my colleagues on the U.S. side and the Canadian side often weren't drawn to the same properties.
Very cool. So your time in New York, if I can speak clearly, New York exposed you to a vibrant cultural scene. So how did that like kind of influence and kind of expose you to different things in your creative development and kind of things that you were able to learn and take with you throughout your career?
So New York was great. If you think about turning 13 and you move to New York, you're just the right age to be jumping on the subway by yourself, take buses places, get around the city. And that's what I did. So I would go to the Museum of Modern Art and hang out on the weekend, watch movies. They had a great movie curator, and they showed great movies by Chaplin and Keaton and some of the silent movies of other artists. And it just was a quick film education. And it was through that running around the city that, I cut classes one day with a good friend, and we went to see underground movies at Hunter College, which was nearby my high school. And I fell in love with those experimental underground films of that era. And they looked like something I could do. So I immediately thought, I'm going to make one of these, and organized some friends of mine, from high school to play the different roles, and then shot them on 8mm, matched up some sort of non-synchronized soundtrack on a tape recorder. And then I started going with my friends to the open film nights at Filmmakers Co-op or Eventorium, to screening groups that had open nights. And so I would show my films along with people who, had been doing these films for 20, 30 years. And I just was so young that I couldn't recognize the difference. But I had the experience of putting myself out there and exhibiting, that earliest of work and getting feedback.
That's very cool and kind of key, getting that feedback.
Yes, feedback is always good. Doesn't matter what kind of feedback it is. I mean, we don't really want to see bad feedback, but any feedback is good. Any answer is better than no answer.
That's right. The worst thing we're seeing in today's society is ghosting.
Yep.
I'll say no more. I'll ghost myself.
Oh, hey now, we got a lot more questions here. So you returned to Toronto to attend York University. How did the Canadian filmmaking scene compare to what you had experienced in the U.S.?
So the Canadian filmmaking scene, there were some interesting people working in it and who had broken through. So Michael Snow was an artist who was part of that scene. He's a Torontonian. You had Arthur Lipset at the National Film Board, and his films were always being screened by these films. And so he was an interesting experimental filmmaker from Canada. But when it came to my peers in college, there weren't people doing it, at least at York. I think there were people doing it at University of Toronto in the same city, but I didn't deal with those people. And there was a good group at McMaster. The McMaster group eventually turned into Ivan Reitman's group, which included two of his writers from the early days, Dan Goldberg and Len Bloom. So, there was a scene, but it took a while to get into it and figure it out. But at York, there was no other scene. So I aggregated a few friends who were interested in making films, and we started, what we did is we actually one of the friends that I worked with and did this movie with was actually my co-director and co-producer, Jack Christie. And the two of us were at Glendon College, which was part of York University. And we got on the same wavelength very quickly. And we decided we'd make a movie, and we called it Assassination Generation. And I hate to use the word inspired, but we were probably driven by, all the assassinations that were happening in the U.S. at the time. They were so dramatic and, and came at a pace and a volume that we had never heard of before.
Yeah, it was crazy back then.
Yep. So I don't know if I answered your question, but that
you did.
Yeah.
Okay. But the one thing I would add, because I think this is interesting, is because of that early career in experimental filmmaking, that was something that we kept that became part of the DNA of Nelvana. We never stopped experimenting. We were always pushing the envelope. Now, we might do some shows that were just ordinary, like, the Care Bears, right? But I think we did a Care Bears series and a great movie. But, we might be doing that. We would also do a lot of projects where we would instill or inject some experimental filmmaking. So, for example, we made a movie called Rock and Rule. And in Rock and Rule, there's a lot of what was for then very experimental technique for doing the special effects. And the movie is well known in animation circles for its great effects. So we were driven by that so we were early users of computer animation in that movie. Another series that was kind of interesting was Beetlejuice, where part of our pitch to Tim Burton was that we wanted to keep some of the mixed media that he had in Beetlejuice the movie. And so, again, driven by experimental sort of efforts and our experience in Rock and Rule, we did a 1-minute commercial using early CGI ahead of when it was really commercially viable. And that was in the early Beetlejuice cartoons to keep that spirit that, Burton is so great at of mixed media.
You've discussed the financial struggles of Nelvana's early years. What kept you motivated during these challenging times?
So early on, and we haven't touched on this, and it's not in my book, I don't think, but I'll share with you. Like when I was a kid, people would ask me, what do you want to be when you grow up? A common question asked of kids. And I would say, I want to be Superman. Or sometimes I would say, I want to be Mickey Mouse. I wasn't sure if I wanted to be a comic book or a But many of the cartoons I grew up with were, in fact, the Warner Brothers Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck cartoons, where, the creatures, our favorite hero characters, Bugs and Daffy, and later the Roadrunner and the Coyote, they would, as long as they didn't look down, they could get to the other side. So early on, I had that comic cartoon approach of defying gravity and reality and believing that if you want to get somewhere, you got to look at where you want to go to, but don't look down, because second guessing yourself, doubting yourself really doesn't add anything to your ability to achieve your goal. You really have to remain positive and enthusiastic about your ability to achieve what you're setting out to do, or you shouldn't do it.
That's great advice.
That's great advice, but I'll add also, sometimes you have to be really stubborn to do it.
Yeah, no, I was incredibly stubborn.
Oh, I am definitely one of those people. I just recorded and released an episode, the last episode before this interview here on GeekCast Radio, with our buddy Mike Powers, and we talked about why he is an iPhone user. And that episode is just under 2.5 hours. It took me about 6.5 hours to edit it, and I'm just like, I am powering through this. I'm getting this done. No matter what.
That's right. You got to be like that. Otherwise, nothing gets done.
That's right. It's like Kevin Conroy's Batman said in one of the DC Animated Universe cartoons.
Block it out and power on through.
So how did your... What was that? Sorry.
I said, all right.
Mm-hmm. How did your father's work ethic and values influence your approach to building and running Nelvana?
So my father was in manufacturing sports bags at the early part of his working career, and eventually slippers. And so what I had the opportunity was to do summer jobs at the factory that he ran in New York, which was the slipper factory. And so I was put one summer, on the assembly line, one summer in sort of packing goods to be shipped, one summer in shipping, and one summer in the finance department, just doing sort of filing and understanding how they divide up their work and how they do their business. And so that background just gave me some work experience in a variety of the aspects, right? Rather than just one.
Yeah.
And when I was working in the packing group, I was able to spend time with a fairly significant diversified group. And it taught me about working with people who weren't like me, didn't come from the same background. They had different problems, and how to sort of, make sure that, all the conversations were respectful.
That's very cool.
What key lessons did you learn from your early experiences with accountants and financial management?
Well, that was one of the greatest weaknesses at Nelvana. Was it took us a long time to build a finance department that could really help drive the company. So most of what I learned along with my other partner, Patrick Loubert, and we basically learned how to, interpret our business, figure out if we were really making money, manage our sort of day to day, because as a company that was bootstrapped with no capital, we had to always manage the business like what a cash business. So typically in the film business, because you do projects that are like, $8 million, $20 million, $50 million, big numbers, you basically, treat it like making an apartment building, where you learn how to amortize the costs over some reasonable period of time, whether it's 5 years, 7 years, 10 years, as dictated by the financial wizards. You basically create value in the current year, because if you do it on a cash basis, you never make the profit in the first year. You're making it over time. So your accounting always looked not as good when you did cash accounting, but it was a safer way to run a business that didn't have capital, because it was harder to get into serious debt. It was harder to get into trouble.
That makes sense. So how did you balance your personal relationship with your professional partnership with Elaine?
Well, I was guilty of not spending enough time on my romantic and personal relationship with my wife, Elaine. And the book has several stories that sort of will attest to that. I was so driven about building this company, and then realizing that we have all these people, writers, directors, animators, painters, layout artists, editors, etc., and financial people and legal people, that they're depending on you to sort of, keep working, keep getting a paycheck, etc. So you're driven by your own personal goals, and as well, you're driven by the responsibility of doing a good job as a manager for your team and your staff. And so for those who are interested in the details, they're going to have to read the book, because I am not going to repeat.
No, absolutely not.
Oh, no.
Nope.
No, that's a great tease for, read the book.
That's right.
Did I say that? What a good idea.
No, we said that.
That's called great marketing.
Yeah.
Read the book.
That's right.
There's no substitute for reading the book.
No, there's
Absolutely. No. It's too bad there isn't an audiobook version of it.
Well, I'll probably get around to that. Right now, and I'm not sure whether I should do it. Somebody who's done a lot of voice direction for all my companies, actually, thought that I should record it myself. Do you guys have any sort of initial thought hearing my voice?
Yeah, I think you could do it.
I always love to hear it directly from the writer, just because it's got that authenticity, and you can feel the energy that that kind of went into the thoughts behind it.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely. I listen to a lot of audiobooks, and I listen to a lot of autobiographies for audiobooks. Yeah. Like I listen to the Joe Kenda books. I've listened to Melissa Joan Hart's book. I've listened to, and the reason why I listen to those books is because I want to hear it from the person that it had. Like reading your book, and the one time that we tested before we did the interview, I was like, oh, I can match his voice now to what I've read.
Right.
And that works. Yeah.
I think that's interesting. I listened to the Bono audiobook, but he didn't do enough editing of himself. It just went on.
Yeah, that's where the trick is in certain pieces of audio. Sometimes you get somebody who can talk and talk. Like Steve and I have both been talking for almost 4,000 episodes in 15 and a half years.
Wow.
Steve's been going a little bit longer than I have, but the network itself, the GeekCast Radio Network, has been online for 15 and a half years. And oh boy, it's a lot. But hearing you say your words in your voice makes sense, because you had I don't think putting somebody in there, say like a superstar voice actor who, insert name here, whoever you want to put in there, reading your story, I don't think that's not authentic. I mean, it's great for some people that have that done because of whatever, but for your story specifically, I would want to hear it in your voice.
Okay. Well, then that'll be my next goal, is do that in the next month. All right. Where were we when we were so rudely interrupted?
It's not rude. It's a part of our culture here. We like to interrupt each other
on GeekCast Radio.
That's right.
Yes. So you described several instances of serendipity and good fortune in Nelvana's early years. To what extent do you believe success in the animation industry resulted from luck versus hard work and talent?
It's a good question. Luck plays an important role, but it's not the whole story. The talent in our case was, we decided that in order to make it in animation, we had to make higher quality work than our potential competitors, like the people who were working professionally in the field were doing at the time. Because this was a low point when Nelvana started to enter the U.S. animation, broadcast system. U.S. animation had fallen on its lowest quality level ever. And Hanna-Barbera and Filmation were two studios doing almost all the shows. So everything had a studio look. There was nothing that was different. Animation cell count had probably dropped from maybe originally 12,000 to 10 to 8 to 6, and could have gone longer. So we basically decided, okay, we're going to make quality shows, and that's what will help us succeed, because it was not clear that there really was a demand. But we would grab attention that way, and it did work. That's what attracted Lucas to A Cosmic Christmas to then hire us, was the fact that we were producing more interesting, more quality work. And when I met with him, one of the things that was impressive to him was the fact that we did all this work in our own studio, didn't go out elsewhere, and it was all artisanal.
Yeah, and I love the fact that you talked about, doing that in the book, about kind of trying to do as much in-house as possible.
Yeah, it was essentially, we kind of saw it as being a soup to nuts kind of operation, right? Later on, we learned how to divide up the work so that we could do a lot more work. But by then we knew what we were doing and got really good at it. That wasn't necessarily the case when we were starting out. But over time, we developed the skills and got better and better with each project.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
What motivated you to pursue the rights to the Babar books?
So I had deep memories of Babar being one of the first picture storybooks that was read to me. And it wasn't read to me by my parents, but every Saturday when we were living in Toronto, I would walk my sister to the public library. And it was a short walk away, but we were little people, and we had to cross one giant boulevard before the lights changed, which we did. So the librarian, though, was very good at getting kids interested in books. And so she had organized a unique way of reading the book so that she could you could be watching the book, and she had an alternative book on the back that she was actually reading the text from. So it looked like she was really, you weren't missing anything because you were seeing the actual pictures. And she would also put on puppet shows with the story. So I'd see Babar in multiple different incarnations. And then because of my Francophone background, having been born in Belgium, Babar was something I really related to. And I was excited at the prospect of being able to bring Babar to other kids.
Absolutely. What were the biggest challenges in doing that, in adapting it to television?
The biggest challenge was threefold. Our TV sale that was financing it in Canada was with the CBC, and they wanted it as a family show. And it played at 7 o'clock at night, which was in the U.S. was known as kind of prime access period. So early evening for adults. And because they wanted it to play essentially to the whole family, we had to figure out how we were going to do the storytelling to bring parents into it. And so we came up with the idea of Babar talking to his children, and they've done something mischievous. They've got in trouble, or they're looking for advice from him. And he says, well, let me tell you about something that happened to me when I was a kid. So then you basically are in the present, have a flashback, which is most of the episode of what happened to Babar when he was a child growing up. And then you come back to the current situation where the kids understand the application of what happened to their father and how it applied to the issue that they were facing themselves. And that worked. That was really good. And then we also added another element to appeal to adults, which was there was a British show called Yes, Minister that basically made fun of British politicians. And so we thought we'd have fun building up the court around Babar. He's King Babar, of course. So he has to have counselors, and he has to have advisors and, people who are serving him and, are ministers of the government, so to speak. And so we played off the relationships of Yes, Minister and got some comedy that, adults could appeal to adults.
Very cool, very cool. You've mentioned the collaborative process behind Inspector Gadget. How did the team dynamics contribute to the show's success?
Well, the show had a really dynamic push because we came into the show at the last minute. There was a financier who had fallen out, and I had met the president of Geek USA, Andy Hayward, and he had told me that if we could find a TV sale worth $40,000 out of Canada, that we could co-produce the show with them. So this would have been this was going to be our first series, and was. And I was successful at getting what really was about 4 to 5 times what Canada was worth at the time from a new pay television broadcaster. And so we became the producers with Geek. And as it turned out, we did the storyboards, the scripts, the voices, the editing for the show. And Geek managed the animation, the animation from storyboard on the show. And they distributed the show. And, Gadget was a great character who was funny and was our proof to the rest of the industry that we could do a very funny comedy.
I loved that cartoon growing up. I still love the theme.
Yeah, so that was done by Haim Saban, who was later very successful. He became really the most successful animation producer of that era with the success of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers.
Mm-hmm.
And now he's a major philanthropist. So,
oh yeah,
he's
definitely good.
Yeah, definitely a force for good.
Mm-hmm. So, what were some of the biggest creative challenges in designing Inspector Gadget's like kind of iconic gadgets and gizmos, and kind of how did that work with the show's humor and tone evolution?
Yeah, so essentially, when you think about producing 65 half hours, you got to come up with a lot of gadgets, right? And so the pressure was on the writers and the storyboard artists and the designers to, come up with those. And because we were doing the 64 or 65 half hours in the time period, and half the time period you might normally do it in, because we started working on it together in January and we were on the air by September, you basically had a very, very tight situation. So people didn't have the luxury of second guessing. They had to be funny right off the top.
Mm-hmm.
So it really spoke to, the individual writers, storyboard artists, creative people on the show, and the leadership that Jean Chalopin, who was the showrunner on the Geek side, had for the show, and some of the terrific writers and storyboard artists that we had on the show, like Pete Sauter and Ray Jaflis, to name a couple.
Yeah, it was definitely evident the fun and creativity that is in that show, and it still holds up in my opinion today. So Nelvana is known for its diverse and memorable characters. So how do you approach character development and ensure they resonate with the audience?
So in many of the shows we did at Nelvana, if that's what we're focused on, the designs, when there was a book and there were illustrations, we were highly driven to stay as close to the popular, look that everybody knew. So being faithful to the underlying work was our Bible, basically, and our direction. And I think that made those shows successful because we weren't trying to make them into something they weren't. We basically were working to bring them to life in a way that, would give pleasure to the people who loved the underlying properties and appeal to people who'd never seen them. So that was our goal.
Very nice, very nice.
Can you share some insights into the creation of specific characters like Babar, Franklin, and the Care Bears?
So Babar was created by Jean de Brunhoff back in 1933 in France, and Laurent de Brunhoff, his son, continued it afterwards. And Laurent always gave credit to his mother, Cécile, as being the one who originally came up with the idea for Babar and told the story. And then when she told it to Jean, he wrote it into a book and he did the illustrations. And while he wanted to put her name on the book, she declined. So interestingly enough, that's the origin of Babar. In the case of Franklin, you had a great writer named Paulette Bourgeois who came up with the idea for Franklin the Turtle. And she partnered with an illustrator, Brenda Clark, who is also a great illustrator. And they came up with a look and a feel for those books that has resulted in over 60 million books being sold. So, that's been a very successful team. So often it is a combination of somebody who comes up with, the text and somebody else who comes up with the look and the feel. There was a third property you mentioned, but I can't remember which one it was.
Care Bears.
So Care Bears was a corporate creation at American Greetings, the card company out of Cleveland. And they were partnered at the time with Kenner Toys. And Kenner was doing strawberry shortcake with them. And American Greetings showed Bernie Loomis, who was the head of what was called MAD, Marketing and Design at Kenner Toys. And they showed him Care Bears. And he fell in love with it, and they partnered that project as their next project after Strawberry Shortcake. So they had two big hits in a row. And then we got asked to do the animation for some of the specials and eventually the movie. And basically, the movie really kicked the property off beautifully. It was, again, like Inspector Gadget, was made in about 9 months, which was an incredibly short time for a feature film. But
it is pretty short.
But essentially, we were basically introducing new toys that were coming to the market, and it was destined when they were going to come to the market. So we had to come to the market around the same time. So, it's interesting that sometimes you do great work under that time pressure, right? And that's what I think you see with both Inspector Gadget and Care Bears. And so Care Bears, the personality developed over a lot of different people, but one of the drivers for the Care Bears personalities as characters was Peter Sauter, who wrote the movie and who was the story editor on the series. And, he really got the Care Bears and did a fantastic job.
Very cool, very cool. So Nelvana kind of went through a lot of different changes between financial difficulties in the 80s and changing landscapes in the animation industry, and then kind of hitting the stride in the early 90s. What were some of the key driving factors in that? When
you're building an animation studio, and particularly doing it in a city like Toronto that didn't have an industry, you had to build up the talent pool to be able to do additional projects. You had to, fly to visit the network. The network wasn't just down the street. And you basically I spent a lot of time on the road building those relationships so that we could sell shows. I had some great executives working for me in LA as well. But in those financial troubles, sometimes they were caused by not selling enough shows, new shows. And you have a fixed overhead in animation that, basically makes it important to keep growing the business. And the other thing that would happen is we had one of the biggest sort of crises we faced was when we were producing a live action series called TNT that was syndicated in the USA and starred Mr. T. And our distributor that was a US company called Hal Roach, they were actually owned by an Australian resort company. And that Australian resort company went bankrupt, which made Hal Roach Studios go bankrupt, which caused us to have to deal with the bankruptcy courts to get our show out of bankruptcy courts so that we could sell it to somebody else and keep on producing in the middle of a production cycle. So that was actually a pretty tough thing, and all the key people at Nelvana had to work on making that happen.
Yeah, it definitely sounded like a roller coaster, and there's obviously a lot more details in your book that explain all of that. And
so read the book.
I found it very interesting. I'm loving the teasing we're getting to do here, though.
Absolutely. Yeah. We should just have an audio clip of him saying, "Read the book.
Read the book.
Read the book. Read the book. Read the book."
We'll just insert it randomly.
That's right.
I read the book and I survived.
That's an awesome clip.
Technically, you wrote the book and survived.
Well, I did that first, but after writing the book, I had to read it to know what I wrote.
That's very true. Proofreading is everything. So the big sale, selling Nirvana. Wow. I almost said Nirvana. Wow. Jeez, wasn't supposed to happen.
Well, it happened more than once in the history of Nelvana. And in fact, funnily enough, we had to give permission to the band Nirvana to get a trademark because Nelvana and Nirvana are too close for them to get it without us approving it.
Oh, wow. That's funny.
That's crazy.
Yeah. And we never regretted it. Never.
There you go. So selling the company to Chorus Entertainment was a major decision. Can you walk us through the factors that led to this decision?
Sure. So by this time, we were the leading independent production company in the world. We were doing over 20 different series. We had the first ever weekend blocks on PBS. So we had 6 shows on PBS. We had the Saturday morning schedule at CBS that we were programming and producing for. And that was 3 hours too. And we had blocks on Nickelodeon and Cartoon Network. And so we were really riding high. And in order to keep on growing, which is what a public company has to do, we felt the only way to achieve that would be to have a broadcaster that was the largest broadcaster in Canada who could basically, commission as many shows as they could from us, and that would add to our growth. So that was one of the drivers. The second driver was that we were kind of in a corner being just in the production business when our best competitors were integrated companies like Disney and Hanna-Barbera. So we thought if we could integrate with the largest kids broadcaster, albeit in Canada, that would basically give us strength in the market. And Chorus was Canada's leading network broadcaster of kids shows. And they bought us. And they bought us with the intent of launching what was then going to be the first preschool channel in the U.S. before Noggin. And but because of the tech meltdown after they bought us, like months after they bought us, the financing for launching the channel disappeared. And so they never did. And so one of their main purposes in buying us just was never achieved because of the crisis caused by the tech meltdown of 2000, followed by 9/11 and its impact on the economy.
Yeah, absolutely. So
I actually didn't answer why we wanted to sell. So I guess the part.
You can read the book for that part, folks.
All right. I am with you. Just read the book. I'm too lazy to tell you the story.
No, he's not, folks. No, he's not. So going from Nelvana to life in the cookie jar, how did you navigate the dynamics of working within a larger corporate structure?
Well, I'm not sure we were a larger corporate structure. Maybe we were. I don't know if I would exactly agree with that. I have to think about it. But the cookie jar was interesting because we bought essentially two divisions. The company Cinar had fallen on hard economic times because their CEOs and their CFO had made $134 million disappear into the Bahamas. And so they were basically asked to leave the company while the company sorted out what really happened. So I was able to buy it with a private equity group, Birch Hill, and we, it took us several years of due diligence to sort of, and working with the courts because there were all these court cases, to sort of get through the process and be able to complete the acquisition. So I had private equity partners, as my board and my partners, and there was a second division besides the Cinar group. There was Carson DeLosa, which was a supplementary educational business out of North Carolina, Greensboro, to be specific. And, so essentially we had to organize how we were going to manage the multiple businesses. And then we also owned 20% of Canada's all animation service at the time, Teletoon. So it was kind of an interesting organizational effort. But because there were so many moving pieces in this company, it was very helpful to have a hands-on private equity group to partner with.
That sounds like a lot. That sounds like a lot of stress.
It really wasn't stressful. It just was a lot. It was a lot to sort out. Because what's interesting is when you acquire a company versus building it up. Like when I built up Nelvana, we did it moment by moment, month by month, year by year, etc. And each thing you do is incremental knowledge, and you have the history all in your mind, right? But when you acquire a company, you don't have that sense of the history of the company. You might have read a few pages, but you didn't live it, so you don't really understand what you've got till you've been with it a while. And you also don't know who in the team is actually going to perform in a way that you would approve of until you've worked with them a bit, because you're inheriting the whole cast and you have to understand everybody's relationships. And also you don't have the history and you need the people with the history. So all of this, gives you a lot to sort through.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to oversimplify it, but it's kind of like when a comic book, like when Batman goes from one story arc to the next story arc, and maybe it's a different writer for each story arc. It's like you have to figure out what the history is and then create your own history going forward.
Right.
So when I read the book and when I looked you up and did all the research for the interview and everything else, the one thing that popped out to me at Cookie Jar was Johnny Test.
Right.
So number one, Johnny Test will be 20 years old next year.
Wow.
2005 to 2025.
Okay.
Number two, we've actually interviewed Hugh Test, Mr. Ian James Corlett, a couple of times.
Hey, this is Ian James Corlett, and you're listening to the GeekCast Radio Network.
So we love Johnny Test. What was it like working on that show?
First of all, it was a lot of fun because they had already produced a season. So this is a show that was developed at Warner Brothers. Warner Brothers put it on the WB, which was their network. And then I think there were subsequent runs on Cartoon Network. And after one season of producing Johnny Test, the WB, or Warner Brothers itself, the parent company, changed their strategy and didn't want to do properties that weren't classic Warner properties. So Bugs Bunny, Daffy Duck, that kind of thing, Roadrunner, or Superman, Batman, etc. So if it wasn't part of that canon of classic Warner's characters, they were asked to stop investing in these shows. So the Warner's animation group, run by a guy named Sander Schwartz at the time, put Johnny Test and a few other things up for auction, and we wanted Johnny Test and went after Johnny Test and won it. And then we started producing it, working with Scott Fellows and continued on the production path that had been set up, but did it, whereas they did one season, I think we ended up doing about 8 or 9 seasons. So it was one of the best things in the cookie jar catalog, and it helped us sell a lot of other library with it, and was really instrumental in building our relationship with Netflix, because when Netflix was starting out, they were having trouble getting more than just a few shows from a Nickelodeon or a cartoon. It was before those groups were selling them a lot. And basically, we were able to take a cartoon show, and because of the fact that we had a Warner Brothers style contract that we stepped into, we had the rights to put it on streaming if we wanted to. And so we were able to have it on Cartoon Network and Netflix at the same time, at an era when that wasn't being done.
Yeah, that was very original to do that.
Oh yeah, totally.
Again, you talk about in the book, and again, folks, read the book, but he talks about the changing landscape. And we often here at the GeekCast Radio Network talking about that when it comes to how we consume media, whether it's movies, TV, music, whatever. Everything has changed and evolved, and it's all different now. And sometimes you can go back, sometimes you can't. Like nobody wants to go back to Betamax. But
nobody wants to go back. The only thing people seem to sometimes want on a very limited basis is back to vinyl.
Yeah, vinyl. And even now with all of the craze of the, I don't want to say upscaling, but the new transfers, the new 4K, like I'm getting back into physical media again. I am buying, because I have a 4K television, I have a 4K Blu-ray player. I am buying so many 4K DVD releases. It's crazy. Because at the end of the day, folks, if the internet goes away, the only thing you're going to have is your electricity, which means you're going to need physical media.
And you're listening to GeekCast Radio.
That's right.
How does WoW Unlimited Media fit into the evolving landscape of the animation industry?
The thesis for WoW, which we started in about 2016, 2017, was we had 2 companies that were in trouble. One was Mainframe in Vancouver, which was producing the Barbie animated specials and the Barbie animated series, and had done a lot of the Sony made-for-TV versions of some of their successful movies in animation. And they were a leading CGI studio. And in addition to them, we put them together with Frederator, which was a great company started by Fred Seibert. At Frederator, we had 2 divisions again. One, the animation group, which did Castlevania while I was there being CEO or being chairman, whatever I was. And also Bravest Warriors, which had started on YouTube as shorts, as well as Bee and Puppy Cat, which had started on YouTube as shorts and developed into a full-blown Netflix series. So you had that part of Frederator, which was a production side, making really interesting cutting-edge shows. And you also had a Frederator multi-channel network, an MCN, which did the job of helping creators grow their channels on YouTube and monetize them. And so those were the 2 businesses that we had, combined with Mainframe as a CGI studio. And what we did is we've basically fixed both companies, grew the production slate dramatically at Mainframe. And because the interest in our kind of company, which was public at the time, in Canada was not great, we decided to merge with a U.S. company now called Cartoon Studios, then called Genius Brands. They were public in the U.S. and they acquired us. And so I was able to sort of take my investors out, and make them some profit and bring the company into the U.S. public markets, where I hoped it would enjoy more acceptance. But unfortunately, that hasn't yet been the case.
See, we're familiar with Mainframe in the 90s with like Reboot and
Right.
War Planets and Beast Wars.
Yeah, so when I was there, we rebooted Reboot and did a new Reboot series that went on Netflix.
Yeah, I remember when that, I think vaguely, that was like, 5 years ago or something?
Yeah, roughly. No, probably even 7 years ago, 6, 7 years ago.
Wow, that's hard to believe.
Time goes by so quickly.
Oh, it does.
And you're listening to GeekCast Radio.
Yes, you are.
So, as you reflect on your career, what are some of the most significant changes you've witnessed in the animation industry?
I would say the most interesting thing that I've seen is threefold. One, there's been a dramatic increase in animation quality. That's number one. So from the time that I referred to earlier on in our conversation when, animation cell count had really dropped and it was very, very limited, because of, what happened in the 80s with us and with Spielberg and, Lucas doing his cartoons and Tim Burton doing Beetlejuice with us, you had a growing demand for high quality animation. And that has just been exponentially driven by the move to streaming, because streaming is all about premium television. So that's one of the changes. The second change is the digitization of the work, which didn't reduce our headcounts ever, but it made us more efficient, able to do more projects and to do them with greater and greater quality. So those are two big changes. And the third that I would identify is that we've seen a dramatic change in who the broadcasters are. So in the beginning of my career, if you were a kid watching cartoons, you were mainly watching Saturday morning for 4 hours on three networks, NBC, ABC, and CBS. Your local station might or might not have syndicated shows on during the morning or the afternoon, or maybe both. But they were often not recently made cartoons and reruns of old cartoons or the import of some international material. So, the nature of the content has changed from that time when there was limited animation to the advent of Nickelodeon and Disney and Cartoon Network, where all of a sudden there was 24 hours a day, 7 days a week of cartoons or children's shows. And so more was being produced, greater quantum. There, you had home video demanding and paying for shows. So you had multiple media at different levels of exposure and distribution that increased the demand for animation. And finally, we've seen with streaming that it's killed the legacy business, and streaming is the whole business that's left. So in a way, we may have more than 3 channels to sell to, like we did in the early days of my career. But I think we're going to see consolidation and potentially have the, say, 7 global streamers that exist shrink down to 4, perhaps. So, but at the same time, these channels have unlimited shelf space, can play a lot of shows, and have the biggest audiences on a global basis than anybody has ever had. So all of this is great.
Yeah. The funny thing about the streaming stuff is when we first started talking about streaming, I don't know, 2010, 2011, 2012, it was Netflix or Hulu. Those were the only 2 that were really there. And then every company, from Disney to Warner's to everything, they all have their own streaming services now. So I don't know how that's going to shrink unless Disney and Warner's buys everything else.
Yeah, no, I think it'll be business combinations. So, for example, nobody knows, but the general wisdom, I think, is that when Skydance finishes buying Paramount, they'll shut Paramount Plus down, or they'll merge it in with somebody else, one or the other. And then there'll be a supplier to everybody rather than just supplying their own channel. Because I think that was the step or the bridge too far, was when you were making everything for your own network and not selling to others. You were losing a lot of income stream. And that resulted in the investment cost for building these services to be higher than anybody had contemplated.
I got to say, that hurts my heart, the fact that Skydance is going to buy Paramount. Oh, God. That company has such a legacy. Oh, boy. All right.
Hey, look, it's been run by some nincompoops for the last 20 years.
I don't disagree with that.
I don't disagree. That's why they had to split CBS and Paramount and then remerge them again.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to aspiring animators and filmmakers entering the industry today?
My advice to young, new talent wanting to enter animation today is twofold. One is the industry at the moment is overheated. The streamers are ordering less. The legacy companies are dying and not ordering much, if anything. And so you need to find another avenue. You may not be somebody that people rush to hire for the next 2 years until the industry comes back to its full strength. And so you have this great opportunity in YouTube, which we haven't really discussed that much about today, where there is no curator. You can make a show that interests you, your favorite character, the character that you've been dreaming of since you were a kid. And you can put out a cartoon every day or every few days or once a week, but on a regular basis. And it could be a short cartoon. It could be 1 minute, or it could be 5 minutes, or it could be 10. It could be whatever length you want. It could be pencil drawings or fully painted or done on CGI. You have your choice of how you do it. You're doing it for yourself. And you can begin at a very, very low level where it's you doing all the work. And then if you're successful in building an audience who watches it and therefore monetizes it, you can start to spend some of the money you're making on building your crew, improving the quality, and eventually building the brand to be an important, strong brand. And if you do that, not only can you continue to live off YouTube, but Apple, Netflix, Amazon, they'll all come calling because they all have enjoyed a hit that was a big hit on YouTube, whether it's Cocomelon on Netflix, has been Hotel on Amazon, or Bee and Puppycat on Netflix again. It doesn't really matter. The point is that properties can become big on YouTube and then transfer over and have another life in another distribution platform.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest one I can think of off the top of my head is Cobra Kai. That started as a YouTube Red series, and then it eventually went to Netflix.
That's exactly it.
Yep.
So essentially, young people today have the choice of doing it yourself. And so I can relate to this as somebody who started off in experimental film, where I made these films. I would take them to an open screen night and put myself out there and meet the audience, right? In the case of, doing YouTube, you basically start to hear from your audience. You build your profile in social media, and your audience is very communicative back to you when they like something. So
Absolutely.
It's really a much better time to be launching that type of career than ever before.
Very cool, very cool. All right, final question. What do you see as the future of animation, and how do you envision your role in shaping that future?
So I think the future of animation will be that we will see the evolution of streaming and how. So currently, and when Netflix started running cartoons, they weren't sure that they needed cartoons. So they came around and they were offering us a few $100s an episode. And we were sure that cartoons would work for them, because once kids saw a cartoon that they liked, we knew they wanted to see it over and over again. And so it'd be hard to drop once you start. And in fact, what we learned from Netflix and the other streamers is that having animation for kids helps reduce the churn. And churn is people turning off a service, canceling the service. So it has a real function for them. They don't think that anybody buys the service necessarily because of the animation, but they think it keeps them on as a customer longer. So that's the critical thinking there, within the YouTube universe and the streaming universe. And what we need to do as an industry is, I think once there's been consolidation, we've got to figure out how to bring back dedicated kid channels like Nickelodeon or Cartoon or Disney that are niche subscription VOD offerings, and that, speak more to the kid and give the kid more volume than the other streamers are prepared to do. So that's my thinking, and I think it doesn't happen until we see the consolidation and the kind of a mature stage for the other streamers.
That is awesome. Is there anything else you would like to say before I run through the closing, sir? This has been a blast.
And it's been a blast on GeekCast Radio.
That's right.
No, I'm feeling fully spoken out. I have no more thoughts. I have no more answers. I have no more questions. It's been a great
We broke his brain, folks.
It wasn't hard to do.
Oh boy. Yes, folks. Animation Nation by Michael Hirsh. Go check it out today. Hopefully he'll talk to Audible and get that audiobook going at some point. But, because the audio version is going to be awesome. When and if it happens, hopefully. Thank you for joining us here on this episode of GeekCast Radio Network Presents. And Steve, thank you for being here as always.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you to our guest, Michael Hirsh. Thank you, sir, so much. Be sure to check out his book at the link in the episode's post. So until next time, unleash the geek in you.
Beetlejuice? Beetlejuice? Beetlejuice?
You've just listened to GeekCast Radio on the GeekCast Radio Network. There are several ways to get in contact with us or leave feedback for the show. First, visit the website, geekcastradio.com, where you can comment on all of our different podcasts. Second, you can rate our show and leave us feedback in iTunes. Third, follow us on Twitter at GeekCast Radio. Fourth, become a fan on Facebook. Go to facebook.com/GeekCast Radio. Call the voicemail line, 502-526-5821. Please remember to tell us the show you are leaving the message for and your name. So until next time, unleash the geek in you.